Alright, welcome back Photoshop users. Today we are going to work on this image and we're going to be working with some adjustment layers. But first, we always want to try to get the image adjusted properly. So here I am in Camera Raw, and probably the first thing I'm going to do is just come up here and just see what the values are in my black shirt here. And we're not far off. Looks like we have a little bit of red in the image, and I can kind of tell that just by looking at the skin tone. So if I look at that black should be neutral or close to neutral, so we want that blue, green, and red to be right around equal values. Alright, so I might just drop that red value down over here. Okay, and now I might bring the blue values up. So now I'm a little bit closer. I've got 22, 21, 21, so red, green, and blue. If those were all equal, I would know that that black is fairly neutral, because we want those values to be very similar. Alright, so right there, so the temperature that works for this image in that black area is a temperature of 5400, looks like, and minus 12. Okay, so then I'm going to brighten it up a little bit, and I think that skin tone looks pretty good. I'm going to brighten up some of my black values because I see some clipping in there in the shadows. That feels pretty good, and I might bring up my highlights values until I see clipping in the highlight areas. Oh, kind of went a little bit too far. And for me, the contrast is a little bit much, so I'm going to just drop it down a little. Okay, and remember, we want to make sure that we're going to have the Adobe RGB 1998. Remember? Yes, you remember. Alright, and I am going to go ahead and open this image up. Alright, so we have this image open, and what I'm wanting you to do is make selections on parts of this. You're going to be making a selection around the face, you're going to be making a selection around the background, you're going to be selecting the arms, the chair, the shirt, and even the pupils of the eyes. So you're going to have to draw upon some of your experience with making selections. Alright, so when we have a selection made, I'm just going to zoom in here on the pupil because that's a fairly easy selection. I'm going to grab my elliptical marquee and I'm just going to draw out a circle. And we've talked about this. We can go ahead and add the spacebar key to move that selection wherever we want to. So I'm going to position it right there. And that looks pretty good. And I think I need to probably take a little bit of intersection, so I'm going to come up here and click on this little button. I'm going to draw a bigger circle and just kind of cut a little bit of that off. Remember how we worked on the pizza image where we were able to make selections by adding to, subtracting from, intersecting. Alright, so I have this part of the eye, and so now what I want to do is make an adjustment layer for that that iris, I guess, is what we're looking at, not the pupil. And so I'm going to come over here, bring my layers over. I'm going to come over here and just click on this little button down here to create new fill or adjustment layer. And then I'm going to come down to hue and saturation. And you'll see when I do that, I basically have added a layer mask. And I think we've talked about layer masks before. And if I option click on that actual layer mask, I can see what happened. So Photoshop took everything except for my selection and painted it black. So we're hiding that. And everything inside the selection is white. So now if I come over here and I click on this adjustment layer, hue and saturation, I can make changes to that, and when I do, you'll see the changes being made right over here in Photoshop. So I can kind of really dial up the saturation on that iris part of the eye. So you want to try to make the selection and then go ahead and add that adjustment layer. And you're always going to work on these adjustment layers here in the Properties panel. And the nice thing about adjustment layers is they are not destructive. So if I wanted to click on this layer, make multiple layers, and come back to this layer, I can always come back and I can make changes to it if the client wants me to change it. And we'll see over here, now we've added some lightness to that image, or I could darken it. And I can do that over and over and over and over and over. Okay? I can even come up here on the adjustment layer and I can change the opacity. So if I wanted to lessen the intensity of that adjustment layer, I can take the opacity down and we can actually just take it all the way off if we want to. And I can turn the actual layer off. So if I'm working on this and I realize that I don't like it, I can turn it off. I can even add to this. So if I come over here and I use my elliptical marquee and I make this selection again, or make a different selection here, and then I'm going to take the intersection, move that up in position, kind of just cut the top of that off a little bit. And now if I fill this with white, remember white reveals and black conceals. So if I come up here and go Edit, Fill, and I fill that selection with white, it's going to reveal my adjustment layer, so my hue saturation. So now as I come over here and I adjust that hue and saturation, it's doing it on both eyes. So just like we can hide layers or hide parts of our image with layer masks, we can actually use this layer mask along with the adjustment layer. Now one thing I need to make you aware of is that I am working in CS6. So CS6 came out with this new properties panel. So anytime you're working on an adjustment layer, so if I add a curves to my image, everything's going to pop up right here in our properties panel. And you'll see as I click on these little icons down here, you'll see that a new adjustment layer gets added. Okay? And we could make adjustments, or we could delete them. So if I right click, I can delete the layer, right click just like a normal layer, inside Photoshop. But what I was getting at is in CS5 and CS4 they called it a mask panel. So if you're looking for a properties panel in CS5 or CS4, you're going to not have any luck. So if you go up under Window and click, you're going to pull down and it's going to say a mask in here. So look under the M's and you'll have a mask panel, and it basically does the same thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about is you'll see that we have the adjustment part of this adjustment layer, and we also have the mask part. So right here in the properties panel, and it works the same way in that mask panel, if I click on here, I get to adjust the actual adjustment layer. If I click on this little icon, then I get to work on the actual mask. And you'll see that we have some features here. If we were wanted to soften that mask, I'll just turn that mask on. I can come over here and slide this feather up, and you'll see that we can soften that actual mask. Now, I've gone overboard here. Sometimes you just want a little bit of feather on there so it's not as harsh. So we can go from 0 pixels of the feather all the way up to 1,000. And 1,000 is just going to kind of wash it out to black. So that's not really good. Alright, so there's 23.5 pixels. And we can also change the density. Now the density is going to change the whole layer. So rather than hiding the entire image, now I'm kind of bringing that back to values of gray. So if I click back on my image, now since we changed the density of that layer mask, this hue saturation is affecting my entire image rather than just that's around the iris. So I'm going to click back on that, go into my mask, and take that density all the way back up. So now 100% black is going to conceal, and the white area is going to reveal. Another thing that we can do is we can come up here and name our adjustment layers just like we do our normal layers. So I'm going to call this iris, hue saturation, and that'll work. We can move layers. So if we want to move this adjustment layer, we can change the stacking order of that adjustment layer. So if it's below our main image, it's not going to affect that iris area. And that makes sense because our image is above that hue saturation adjustment layer. So we want to make sure that it's above, and then it will affect every layer below it. Now we have adjustments up here. We can get to these adjustment layers as well up here. So we can choose layer, and then pull down to new adjustment layer, and we have all the same adjustment layers here that we can add. And so if I click on here on this one called brightness and contrast, you can name it here, and you'll see over here in our layers it added a new brightness and contrast layer. Now if I go and adjust, if I adjust the brightness, it's going to adjust everything in my image because I'm not masking it, right? That makes sense? Sure it does. I can darken it, but I'm adjusting and darkening everything. What if I just wanted to darken this iris part of the eye, and I wanted to use this same mask up here? Well, all we have to do is we're going to click on that mask, and I'm going to hold down Option. So Option duplicates the mask, and I'm going to just drag it down onto my iris, and Photoshop's going to ask me, do you want to replace that layer mask? And I'm going to say yes, because I want that layer mask to only brighten up the iris part. So now we're protecting everything but the iris. So if I click on my brightness here and now brighten it, you'll see that all I'm doing is brightening the iris part of the eye. And that makes sense because we duplicated that mask, and so everything in black is going to conceal and everything in white is going to reveal. And all I'm doing is option clicking on that layer mask. I think we could right click on it and say disable layer mask, or not disable, enable. It's not going to let us show the actual, so option clicking on that mask will actually show you the mask on the actual image. Alright, so just remember, if you add an adjustment layer, there's a couple places where we can do it. We can do it here in our layers. We can do it here in our properties panel, or our adjustments. Actually, I'm not saying the properties panel. If we come up here, Windows, and click on this adjustments panel, that's where you're going to make these selections down here. I just have them docked together. I have my properties panel and my adjustments panel docked together. So we can add adjustments here. So when I click on this little icon, it's going to add that adjustment layer up in our layers. And remember that if it's all white, it's going to affect the entire image. Right? That makes sense. If this is filled with black, it will do nothing, because black in that layer mask is going to hide anything that we do to that. Oops, sorry, I'm in the layer mask. So if that layer mask is black, nothing's going to happen. If I option drag a layer mask to the new layer, I can replace it. And now when I click on this image, it's basically giving me 2 layers of brightness on that iris. Alright. Well, I think that covers everything on adjustment layers. Just remember that these are non-destructive. If I save this as a layered file and I come back and need to work on this in a couple of months or a couple of weeks or a couple of years, I can just work on these adjustment layers. I can throw them away. I can change the opacity. It's a very cool way of working with Photoshop in a non-destructive manner. So, alright, play around with it and get comfortable with it. And I thank you for watching the video, and I will see you down the road in yet another video tutorial.